The message came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before my wedding. I was standing at my kitchen counter in my condo in the Distillery District, still in my robe, waiting for my coffee to finish brewing when my phone lit up. "My mom wants to do a private lunch with you today. Just the two of you. She said it would mean a lot to her. Can you make it work?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. My fiancé had never once suggested his mother wanted time alone with me. In the 8 months we'd been together, every interaction with his family had been carefully orchestrated large gatherings at their Rosedale estate, charity galas where I was introduced quickly and then forgotten, a Boxing Day dinner where I sat at the far end of a table that could seat 24. His mother had never pulled me aside, never called me directly, never expressed any particular interest in knowing me at all. So why now? 3 days before the wedding? I typed back, "Of course, what time?" His reply came immediately. She said noon. The York Club. I set my phone down and poured my coffee. "I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened next. I grew up in Moncton, New Brunswick, the kind of city that people in Toronto politely pretend to have heard of. My mother was a high school French teacher. My father drove long-haul trucks across the Maritimes. We were not poor, but we were not the kind of family that belonged to private clubs or sent their children to Upper Canada College. I got a scholarship to the University of Toronto, graduated top of my program in accounting, articled at a mid-size firm downtown, and then, 12 years ago, I quietly built my own thing. My consulting firm had 11 employees, a modest office on Adelaide Street, and clients that included 3 of the largest construction companies in Ontario, 2 publicly traded real estate investment trusts, and 1 government ministry that I was not permitted to name. What I did, specifically, was forensic accounting. I found money that people had hidden, traced assets that had been moved, and reconstructed financial histories that other people had worked very hard to destroy. I was good at it. Very good. I had testified as an expert witness in 22 court cases and had never once been successfully cross-examined. My fiancé knew I was an accountant. He did not know the scope of what I actually did. In the beginning, I had described my work simply I help businesses sort out their books, and he had nodded with the mild, pleasant interest of a man who didn't need to think about money. He came from a family that had been wealthy for 3 generations. His grandfather had built a commercial real estate empire across southern Ontario. His mother now ran the family holding company. His younger sister sat on the board. Money, for them, was furniture always there, always present, something you sat on rather than thought about. I took the streetcar to the York Club. My future mother-in-law was already seated when I arrived, at a corner table near the window, in a cream blazer with the particular kind of relaxed posture that comes from a lifetime of knowing you belong everywhere you go. She was 61 years old and looked 50. She stood when she saw me and air-kissed both my cheeks. "I'm so glad you could come on short notice," she said. "I hope I didn't interrupt anything important." "Not at all," I said. "I was just finishing up some reports." She smiled the way people smile when they're not really listening. "Well, sit, please." We ordered. She had the smoked salmon. I had the roasted beet salad. We talked about the weather, which had turned cold for early October, and about the flowers for the ceremony, which she had opinions about, and about the hotel block for the out-of-town guests, which was apparently not quite the right property but would have to do. I let her lead. I asked polite questions. I watched her hands. Her daughter, my future sister-in-law, arrived 20 minutes in, slipping into the third chair at our table as though she had been expected all along. She kissed her mother's cheek and looked at me with a smile that was perfectly calibrated to be just barely friendly. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "The gardener was an absolute disaster." I realized then that this had never been a private lunch. This was a meeting. A server refilled my water glass. My future mother-in-law waited until he had stepped away before she said, "We've been going over the prenuptial agreement with our lawyer, and there are a few things we'd like to discuss with you before Saturday." I set down my fork. "Of course." "The clause regarding jointly held business interests," she said, opening a slim leather portfolio I hadn't noticed on the seat beside her. Our lawyer flagged some language that could create complications down the line. "We'd like to propose a modification." She slid a single page across the table. I picked it up and read it. On the surface, it looked like a standard amendment, clean language, professional formatting. But I read the way I always read, slowly, looking for what wasn't said as much as what was. And what wasn't said, in that amendment, was that the modification didn't just clarify joint business interests. It extended the definition of shared enterprise to include any company in which either spouse held a beneficial interest, including through a trust, including through any holding structure, retroactive to the date of engagement. My consulting firm was held inside a family trust that I had set up 4 years ago on the advice of my estate lawyer. It was structured exactly the way the new language would capture. The clause, if I signed it, would give my fiancé, and by extension, his family's holding company, which he was a shareholder of, a legal claim to 50% of everything I had built. I looked up from the page. My future mother-in-law was watching me with a pleasant, patient expression. Beside her, my future sister-in-law was looking at her phone. "I'd want to have my lawyer review any changes before I sign," I said. "Of course," my future mother-in-law said. "We just wanted you to have it before the weekend." Then her daughter looked up from her phone and said something in French. She said it quietly, directed at her mother, as though I weren't there. Or rather, as though I were there, but might as well not be. What she said, translated, was, "Does she even understand what she just read?" Her mother replied in French without looking at me. "She's an accountant from Moncton. She does bookkeeping. She'll sign whatever her lawyer tells her to sign, and her lawyer doesn't know about the trust structure." Her daughter made a small sound of amusement. What does he even see in her? Her mother picked up her water glass. "She's sweet, uncomplicated. He was always going to need someone manageable after the disaster with the last one." I let them finish. I took a sip of my sparkling water. I smoothed the page on the table in front of me. Then I said, in French, in the particular French of someone who grew up speaking it at the dinner table every night of their childhood, the French of Moncton, which is not Parisian but is entirely, fluently real, I said. "That's a very interesting assessment. Should I ask the server to bring dessert menus? Or would you both prefer to get straight to the part where you explain why your family holding company transferred $4.2 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands 18 months ago?" The silence at the table was extraordinary. My future sister-in-law's phone slipped slightly in her hand. My future mother-in-law put down her water glass very carefully, as though it might shatter if she moved too quickly. I had not planned to say that last part. I want to be honest about that. What I had discovered accidentally, or at least, not on purpose. 6 weeks earlier, a client of mine had asked me to review a series of real estate transactions in the Greater Toronto area for signs of irregularity. It was routine work. I had pulled records, cross-referenced them with provincial filings, and found something I wasn't expecting to find. A numbered company that appeared repeatedly across several transactions turned out to be connected, through 2 layers of holding structure, to my future mother-in-law's family firm. I had put the file away and told myself it was a coincidence. I had tried not to think about it, but I had not deleted the file. I looked at my future mother-in-law across the table. She was a composed woman. She had spent her whole adult life in rooms where composure was the currency, and I will give her this: she recovered faster than most people would have. "I don't know what you think you've found," she said, in English now. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." I stood up and folded the amendment page into quarters and put it in my bag. "I'll give this to my lawyer," I said. "Thank you for lunch." I walked out of the York Club in the October wind and stood on the sidewalk on St. George Street for a moment, just breathing. The CN Tower was visible to the south, gray against a grayer sky. A cyclist rang their bell at a pedestrian who had stepped too far off the curb. I took the streetcar home. I sat by the window and watched the city move past. Here is what I did not do. I did not call my fiancé. I did not go home and cry. I did not open a bottle of wine and call my best friend and ask what I should do. Those would all have been reasonable responses. They were not the responses I was capable of making. Because I had spent 12 years training myself to treat a problem as a problem, something with edges, something you could map. What I did instead was go to my home office, open my laptop, and spend the next 7 hours doing what I do professionally. I already had the file from my client work. What I hadn't done, because I had been trying not to, was follow the numbered company all the way to the end. I followed it now. What I found, over the course of that evening, with my third coffee going cold beside me and the city darkening outside my window, was a structure that someone had clearly spent significant time and money building. Layers of numbered companies. Real estate transactions recorded at values that required a particular kind of optimism about the market. Mortgage documents with signatures that looked, If you put two of them side by side and squinted, like they might have been signed by the same person at different times trying to look like two different people. At the center of it, as the common thread connecting everything, was a name. My fiancé's name. Not his mother's. Not his sister's. His. He was 38 years old and handsome and funny, and he had, for 8 months, made me feel like the luckiest woman in Ontario. He had also, it appeared, been running a fraudulent mortgage scheme through a network of shell companies for at least 4 years, using real estate properties his family's holding company controlled as the vehicle. The offshore transfer I had mentioned at lunch was part of it. The $4.2 million was not a tax strategy. It was a payment. I sat with that for a long time. The thing about doing forensic accounting for a living is that you stop being surprised by what people do with money. You stop being surprised by how elaborate and patient the deceptions can be, how much effort intelligent people will put into constructing something dishonest when they believe no one is watching. What you never entirely stop feeling, even after 12 years, is the specific quality of the silence that follows the moment you understand what you're looking at. It's not shock, it's something quieter than that. The soft sound of something you had believed in becoming something else. I printed everything. 3 separate copies. One for my lawyer, one for myself, one to give to someone who needed to know. Then I did something that I have thought about many times since, and that I still believe was the right choice, even if it was not the obvious one. I did not cancel the wedding. I want to explain why, because this is the part that people always ask about. Why would you show up? Why would you go through any of it? Why not simply walk away, contact the authorities, let the lawyers handle it? The answer is that I had spent 8 months being managed, being assessed, being categorized as sweet and uncomplicated and manageable, being invited to a private club to be handed a document designed to take what I had built by people who assumed I wouldn't notice what I was reading because they had decided who I was before they ever bothered to find out. I was not going to disappear quietly. I was not going to be the girl from Moncton who got handled and then went away. I was going to finish this on my terms, in front of witnesses, in a way that could not be revised or reframed later. The rehearsal dinner was Friday evening at the family's Rosedale estate, a house that had been built in 1923 and renovated 3 times since, with a dining room that seated 30 and a garden that the family used for outdoor entertaining in all but the coldest months. 60 people were invited: family, close friends, the wedding party, a catered dinner, a string quartet. I wore the green dress my best friend had helped me pick out for the occasion, the one that my fiancé had said made me look like I belonged anywhere. I did my own hair, and I drove myself, and I arrived at 7:15, when the room was already warm with people and conversation. My fiancé found me at the door. He was wearing a navy blazer, and he looked genuinely happy to see me, which was one of the more complicated things about the evening. "You look incredible," he said. "Thank you," I said. He kissed my cheek and took my coat, and I let him, because there was a sequence to this and I was not going to break it early. I found my future mother-in-law near the fireplace, speaking with a couple I didn't know. She looked at me when I entered, and something moved through her expression, not fear exactly, but the cousin of it, calculation. She excused herself from her conversation and came to me. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Where else would I be?" I said. She studied my face for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I think we should talk before dinner." "I think we should do it during dinner," I said. At the table, with everyone present. She was still working out how to respond to that when my future father-in-law, a tall, quiet man who had largely stayed at the margins of every interaction I'd had with this family, came and touched his wife's arm and asked if she'd seen the Hendersons, and she was drawn away, and I went to find my seat. I had been placed, as usual, at the far end of the table. I waited until the first course was cleared. There was a natural pause in the conversation, the kind that falls over a table between the salad and the main course, when people have exhausted their small talk and are waiting for something to fill the space. Into that pause, I set down my wine glass and spoke loudly enough for the end of the table nearest me to hear, but calmly, the way I speak in a courtroom. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I said. "And I want to say something before tomorrow because I think some things should be said while there are people who matter present." A few heads turned. My future mother-in-law, 15 feet away, went very still. My fiancé, seated near the middle of the table, looked at me with an expression of careful uncertainty. 3 days ago," I said, "I was invited to lunch at the York Club." I was given an amendment to our prenuptial agreement that was designed to capture the business I have built inside my family trust, a business that I have spent 12 years building and that those drafting the amendment clearly understood had significant value, despite the fact that I had been consistently described within this family as a bookkeeper. No one at the table was talking now. I was also able to hear, at that lunch, a private conversation in French that I was not meant to understand. In that conversation, I was described as sweet, uncomplicated, and manageable. I looked down the table at my future mother-in-law. Her face had taken on the quality of something that had been made very rigid to prevent it from moving. "I want to be transparent," I said, "about who I actually am. My name is on the incorporation documents of a firm that has, over the past 12 years, worked on more financial fraud investigations in this province than I can count here tonight. I grew up in Moncton. I speak French. I have a master's degree in forensic accounting. And over the past 48 hours, I have had occasion to review certain financial records that I believe several people at this table will recognize. I reached into my bag, the same bag I had carried to lunch on Tuesday, and I removed a single page, condensed, clear, a summary document. I had prepared it the way I prepared every expert report, for a reader who needed to understand quickly and could not be given room to misunderstand. I passed it to the person beside me and asked them to send it down the table. "I'm not going to make accusations tonight," I said. "That's not what this is. What this is notice. Notice that I have the records. Notice that my lawyer has a copy. And notice that the prenuptial agreement, as originally drafted, not the amended version, has been filed with my lawyer, and that I will not be signing anything new." The page reached my fiancé. I watched him read the first 3 lines. I watched the color leave his face. "I also want to say," I said, "for the benefit of anyone in this room who is a friend of mine rather than his family, which is several of you, that I am genuinely sorry you traveled here for a wedding that isn't going to happen. I would have told you sooner if I had known sooner." I stood up. I thanked the catering staff. I did this genuinely, because it was not their evening either. And I picked up my bag and I walked out of the dining room of that 1923 Rosedale estate on a Friday night in October with 60 people watching. My best friend, who was seated 3 chairs from me and had known me for 22 years, caught up with me in the front hallway. She was holding both our coats. "I didn't know everything," I told her, because I needed to say that. "I know," she said. She handed me my coat. "You want to come to mine?" "Yes," I said. We drove north along Yonge Street, and I looked out the window at the city. There is a moment, after you've done something that cannot be undone, where the absence of the future you had planned sits in the air around you with a physical weight. It is not grief exactly. It is more like orientation, like your whole body recalibrating which direction is forward. My best friend made tea, and we sat in her living room until 2 in the morning. She asked questions and I answered them. She didn't say "I told you so," even though she'd had a particular expression since she first met my fiancé at a dinner party in March, the expression of someone exercising very deliberate restraint. What happened after that happened slowly, the way these things always do when institutions are involved. My fiancé's lawyer called my lawyer. There were conversations I was not present for. The prenuptial agreement, as originally drafted, held. My firm remained entirely mine, held in my trust, as it always had been, uncaptured by anyone's modification. The forensic file I had compiled was provided to the relevant regulatory bodies through the appropriate channels. I was not the investigating authority. I was a witness. I gave my statement once, clearly, and then I let the professionals do their work. I did not, as some people seem to expect from this kind of story, watch the whole thing burn from a front row seat and feel satisfied. The satisfaction, if that's the right word for it, came earlier. It came in the dining room on Friday night, in the specific and private moment when I passed that summary page down the table and watched my fiancé read it. It came from being exactly what I had always been, in a room full of people who had decided I was something smaller, and simply being seen. The condo in the distillery district took some adjusting to, on the weekends especially, in the first few months. I had got used to having plans. I went back to work, and the work was absorbing, and the city was large, and I am, by nature, a person who is capable of being alone without being lonely. I ran along the lakefront in the mornings. I called my mother in Moncton on Sunday evenings. I met my best friend for dinner every second Thursday at a ramen place on Dundas that we had been going to since graduate school. I thought about the York Club lunch sometimes, specifically about the moment I had walked out of it, alone, with the October wind off Lake Ontario at my back. I thought about the rehearsal dinner and the look on my fiancé's face when he read those first 3 lines. I thought about my future mother-in-law calling me sweet and uncomplicated in French. And I thought the way I always think, after a case is closed, about what I would have missed if I hadn't been paying attention, about what they had nearly gotten away with, about how carefully they had moved, and how certain they had been that I would not move carefully back. Here is what I want to say to you. If you are listening to this from somewhere in this country, somewhere cold and large and real, the people who underestimate you are giving you something. They are making a gift of their certainty that you cannot see what they are doing. And when you're someone who has spent a decade learning to follow money through the dark, when your entire professional existence is built on seeing what other people chose not to see, the worst mistake someone can make is to assume you're looking the other way. I was never looking the other way. I was just waiting until I knew everything.